So what I wanted to ask is those that maybe aren't familiar with aimlessness, but you've heard the term, you've heard people talk about aimlessness or aimless, and what I wanted to know is when you hear that term aimless, what do you connect that to? What does it conjure up? Do you have a synonym for it or another reaction to the word?
Wandering without direction.
Wandering without direction.
Wandering.
Wandering. Not wondering. That would be probably better than wandering, right? Yeah. Wandering without direction. Yeah.
Not aspiring.
Not inspiring.
Aspiring.
Not aspiring. Okay. Can you tell I have hearing problems there? Not aspiring. Wonderful, thanks.
Aspiring.
Aspiring, not aspiring.
Not goal directed.
That's what it,
I'm sorry?
not aspiring.
Not goal directed.
Not directed?
Not goal directed.
Not goal directed. Not goal directed. In the back, all the way? No? Okay, great.
George, what do they call it when there's scientific research, but they're not going after anything? It's just to advance the name of science, advance scientific knowledge, but it's really not for a specific purpose. There's a name for that.
Basic.
Basic research.
Basic research is aimless.
Yes.
Okay, all right. I was just trying to understand what word was saying.
50 years ago, I heard that from my father's father. That's an attempt at humor.
I got it, yeah. Probably wasn't so good, though, if it really hurt it, right?
Non-grasping.
Non-grasping. These are great. Yeah, so this is this term, right? So imagine that I'm talking about the audacity of it when you get this, right? I had found something. Believe it or not, when I first looked this up to see where the culture thinks about it, a lot of the quotes I found were from religious organizations. Okay. Talking about the problem of today's young people who are wandering, corrupted and aimless. You know, how un-American, right? And so aimlessness in our culture is kind of frowned upon. It's not too great, right? It's kind of the path of losers and misfits and people that don't have a plan, right? So Marion just got inspired by something. Okay. Corrupted, yeah. Misfits.
Homelessness.
Right. Now I know that there's another one. Which one? Free spirit. Free spirit. And one more. Slothful. Marianne said she was going to have her husband come up and do the spelling. So, slothful. Now we're going to ask for some of you that have been around the practice or have been around Buddhism for a while, and just if you could give us maybe a different slant or something that how you have heard the term aimless that you associate.
Letting go of outcomes.
Letting go of outcomes.
Equanimity.
Joyce?
Non-attachment. Non-attachment.
Non-attachment.
No expectations.
No expectations.
Being present.
Being present? Being present? Yeah.
Going with the flow.
Going with the flow. These are getting better, we feel like, right?
Equanimity.
Equanimity. from Zach. So we have some different reactions, right, from the culture and our tradition and Buddhism in general. And so, this on the first page, when I looked at that for myself, and it's the way I dealt with that term. I have struggled a long time with being an activist and being involved in Thay's teachings and wondering how the two of those terms would come together. Engaged Buddhism, which Thich Nhat Hanh has coined, recognized to coin the term, and he wrote a book, Engaged Buddhism, I think it was 1956, and then aimlessness. So how did those two go together as, and how could this kind of nothing be the biggest maybe the biggest contribution? And so let's see here. So this, we're talking about the audacity of aimlessness. Now, audacity is a term that I really like. It's kind of in your face, a little bit. And it's like, the audacity of that guy, right? And I picked up on the fact that President Obama had written a book called The Audacity of Hope. And it was a follow-on to his stirring speech at the 2004 Democratic Convention, a speech where he talked about the audacity of hope. And basically what he was saying in that speech was that, in the face of countless odds against us and all the things that are going, we generate hope. We don't just have it like, gee, I hope that's going to happen. We generate it. We generate hope as a power. And so he used that audacity. And when I heard that term, I thought, well, the audacity of Thich Nhat Hanh, to ask us to engage and then be aimless, So I kind of thought it was kind of audacious on the part of Thay. So, how do I put these together? So I want to, I'm trying to know what my next slide is. Does it tell me? I think it's actually blank. This was where actually we were going to work on the board. But I wanted to connect to the lineage because a lot of us think of Thich Nhat Hanh from Engaged Buddhism. That's where he's kind of recognized around the world. All of the work he did in Vietnam, of course, during the war, and how he led Buddhism into action. How do we reconcile that with this aimlessness? And I think it's important to remember his lineage. And I know you can't see this slide, and I'm not going to go through the whole thing. And unfortunately, it turns out that a laser pointer doesn't work on a television set. So you can't get anything. But kind of this is a mapping of the lineages in the Mahayana tradition of Buddhism. There's a school of the elders and there's school of the Mahayana, the greater vehicle they call it. So this is the Mahayana, and kind of not all the way at the top, but close to the top is Shakyamuni Buddha, who is the historic Buddha, Gautama, in India. And then the green there is teachers that flowed from him, that were his disciples. And when you come down, take a closer look, see the green there is Bodhidharma. Bodhidharma went into China. So that's when, and is recognized as the bringing Zen into China. And then it starts to get red, and that's the Chinese masters. And you see Thay here at the bottom, Thich Nhat Hanh. And I bring this up because Thich Nhat Hanh speaks a lot about more this relationship with Master Lin Chi. And some people spell it Linji, but Master Lin Chi, who is a Renzai Zen teacher. And Thay is founded in his tradition. So the record of Lin Chi, right? Handsome guy, right? Yeah, see? Notice the resemblance? See? So But he's a very famous Zen teacher, and he's the Zen teacher with a stick, like if either shouts at you or hits you with a stick. And he's credited as he was a Zen teacher that basically said, knowing all the sutras and all the stuff is the booby prize, I mean, I'm paraphrasing him, obviously. But it's kind of what he said, right? And he said, and I'll let you read that there, just live it, be ordinary. Do nothing, doing nothing. And this term, and Thich Nhat Hanh talks about this term, comes from Lin Chi. Be a businessless person without aim. Just like we've been criticizing those young people with no aim. So this is what the master is telling teachers. Now, Thai wrote a book that is really about the record of Lin Chi and its commentaries on the record of Lin Chi. It's titled, some of you know it, Nothing to Do, Nowhere to Go. I like the subtitle, the Waking Up to Who We Really Are, which is very important. Because Thai talks about the businessless person and aimlessness, but he picks up on something in Lin Chi that I think is very critical, and it's at the very top, that the person is sovereign to herself. So there's power in the sovereignness, and Lin Chi talks about that. And I connected it recently in my mind when I read this to something I've heard Thai say when he's talking about walking meditation. And how fast we do or don't walk in walking meditation. And he said, Buddhists are not snails. We're tigers, right? So you walk like a tiger does with sovereignty. If you watch a tiger, they're not running. I mean, they do run after prey and so forth. But if you watch them walking in the forest, they're sovereign to themselves. So the true person is participating in their environment and but is not opposed by it, not oppressed by it. And their liberation contributes to the liberation of all beings. So this connection for me is very strong about where Thai connects through and where he's taking the teachings of Lin Chi. Aimlessness is one of the three doors of liberation in Buddhism, in all Buddhism. They talk about the three doors of liberation. So I think, I grew up Catholic and I come through the Catholic Christian background, and Christianity talks mainly about salvation and redemption, and Buddhism talks really about freedom and liberation. And what are we liberating ourselves from? We're liberating ourselves, untethering ourselves from wrong view about birth and death. We're liberating ourselves from fear. One of the things when you follow this teaching and you read through Aimlessness and the writings on it that I've seen that Thai writes about, he talks about fearless, being, the liberation from fear, and that is the greatest gift that we can give other people, is to give them the liberation from fear. So aimlessness has a very powerful role. I came to discover Thai through writings of Thomas Merton, monk Thomas Merton, and he was talking about Tao, readings from the Tao. It's called Wei Wu Wei. Action, Wei means action. Wei, so action of non-action. So the action of non-action. So aimlessness is connected to the action of non-action. And Ty says something interesting in this particular book he wrote in 2009. Let's see if I can find that. Sorry. So in this book, Answers from the Heart, Ty was asked a question about doing nothing. Somebody asked him, and he said, in our society, we're inclined to see doing nothing as something negative, even evil. But when we lose ourselves in activities, we diminish our quality of being. We do ourselves a disservice. It's important to preserve ourselves, to maintain our freshness and good humor, our joy and compassion. People should learn how to just be there, doing nothing. Doing nothing brings about the quality of being, which is very important. And in this book, he also has this quote, our quality of our being is the foundation for the quality of our actions. So aimlessness is tied to the quality of our actions. It's not about no action. Like I said, I've been struggling with this for a while, and we have a Dharma teacher. Some of you, I'm sure, know a Dharma teacher named Chan Wee. How many folks in here know Chu Chan Wee? Yeah. So Chan Wee received the Lamb transmission from Thai in 1994. He was one of the early teachers here in the United States. He is Vietnamese. He was born in Vietnam, but lives in Ottawa, Canada. And he's been coming to Pittsburgh for 19 years for our retreats. And I took a consultation with him the last retreat or retreat before, and I said, I am really struggling with this aimlessness. And he said, well, you don't get it. He's usually I keep telling him he has a stick too. He said, it's not about doing nothing. He said, Gandhi worked tirelessly, I'm quoting him now, in aimlessness. And Thich Nhat Hanh has worked tirelessly in aimlessness for years. And Martin Luther King Jr. worked tirelessly in aimlessness. It wasn't that they didn't do anything, it's just that they didn't get hung up with their anxieties around their efforts. It didn't take away their energy. He said, they worked very hard, but they were not tired because they were not holding on to the anxiety, the fear, and the need for results that strips away our energy. So they weren't, maybe to Heather's point, they were letting go of results. They were joyful in their work. He said, for a long time, especially when Ty was writing his books, he slept maybe 3 or 4 hours a night, yet he was always fresh. And for me, it's like that Zen act of sweeping the floor, chopping the wood, carrying the water. You know, we take the actions, and we just take the actions. And not that we don't have emotion, but again, his final point was, you know, we're not struggling after it, right? I don't know if that's up in here or not. Yeah, I started to think of it this way. It's the actions are up the top there, and the aimlessness is kind of the ground of our being that's nurturing the actions. And at least that's how this is kind of where I've come to with trying to understand how aimlessness fits with Thai's tradition, and that he always calls us to action. I think Andrew was talking about that earlier, that Thai says we look deeply, and once we look deeply, we're mindful, then we have to act. It's not that you just hang out in mindfulness, and understanding. So you're called to act by that. So that's part of it here, and I think now I want to. This next step is a little bit of a leap, so I hope you'll hang with me on it, because it's where I'm trying to make a hard connection between this nothing that could change everything. And this comes actually from a presentation that I gave to the Interfaith Power and Light conference last year. They actually invited me. Well, I was invited, a friend of mine at the Thomas Merton Society but they were looking for people in the Asian traditions or the Eastern traditions to come help because of the despair and everything. All of us that have been activists and, kind of, I heard that today in some of our sharings, our energies have been really crashing, right, in the last year. And they were all feeling it, and they said, we should bring some of the Eastern people to speak to us about, how to take care of ourselves. And that's what the retreat was, the conference was about. So I called it in the new equation, and I'm going to show you this equation, we are the difference. But I'd like to start off with a little background on the Earth holders with a video here. So we created that for Ty for his birthday 2 years ago, and to show him where his continuation was going. I don't know if you caught the front part of that, but it's very important to this next couple of slides. 1970, Thich Nhat Hanh and Sister Chan Khong and an American pacifist leader who was a pacifist leader during the Vietnam War, Alfred Hassler, created the largest environmental conference that ever happened. 2,200 scientists met in southern France. And from that conference, they looked at poverty, war, overpopulation, environmental destruction. And they looked at the interweavings of that. And they wrote a paper called the Menton Paper, which is the Menton Statement, which I'll show you in a minute. But that was Ty's original work that we could mark anyway in terms of the environment. And it's really, as we formed the Earth Holders, what we wanted to do was to continue that work and bring it forward. So that's the grounding of it. And I guess one of the things I wanted to say in there, you saw a lot of action. So the Earth Holders has definitely been a lot of action, but there's also a document, a 110-page document that you saw quickly referenced in there that's available in PDF on our website. And it has so many of the earth-holding practices that you've been hearing on this retreat, whether it's touching the earth or lots of different writings and things that you can do in your sanghas are there on the website. And a lot of inspiration from Ty and others. So in 2008, Ty wrote this book, The World We Have, and he talked about the bells of mindfulness, and that chapter talks about the floods and the droughts and everything that are real bells that are ringing, calling us to action. And they're trying to wake us up. This is the quote from the book, reminding us to look deeply at our impact on the planet. So I wanted to show you, when I say we're the new equation, here's the equation. This equation was written in 1968. It's written by two doctors from Stanford, Paul and Ann Ehrlich. And the equation is conceptual, but I think it's pretty strong. It's that the impact human beings are having on the planet is equal to population times technology times affluence. So they're multiplying each other. And that actually certainly affects the environment and the planet itself, but it affects our relationships too if you think about where we are, because when that equation was written, there were about 3.5 billion people on the planet, and there are 8 billion people on the planet now. And so that number's way, just going out of whack. So is technology. We're blowing mountains off, tops of mountains and other things to get at the source we need for 8 billion people. So the technology, which has also been doing a lot of work for us, is very fossil-based. And then the affluence means we're trying to raise boats for everybody to get them out of, pure poverty and subsistent living, but that multiplies that effect. And I guess there's one problem with this equation. Anybody know what the major problem with this equation is? There's no denominator. There's nothing on the bottom, right? So this man named Ray Anderson, who's been recognized as the greenest CEO in the world, in the United States, he ran a business that was very polluting. And his people came to him and said, what are we going to do about sustainability? He said, I didn't know even what the word meant. But he really got into understanding it, and he read some Paul Hawkins books, actually, what happened. And he said in his company they were going to change that equation. They were going to put a new thing in the denominator, which was really innovation. And when I mean innovation, he sent his R&D people into the woods for 3 weeks to say, study how nature would make a carpet. They're the largest manufacturer of carpet tiles in the world. Go study geckos. How do they stick to ceilings with no glue? I mean, he was thinking like that. And at the time he was presenting, this is from a TED Talk, if any of you are familiar with TED Talks. And I had a wonderful chance to meet him right before that. But he was saying that by the time they gave the TED Talk, 15 years after he got this vision, they were already 90%, they'd already cut their emissions by 90%, which is what the world has to do. And they gained they became number one in their market share in doing it and made a lot of money. But if you listen to that, and I really would encourage you to listen to that video, that TED Talk for 15 minutes. He got to the end of it and he said, but we're still not in heaven. This is not going to take us to heaven. Technological revolution, breakthrough is not going to get it done. We're missing something. So he put an H in the bottom of the equation. And he said it stands for happiness. And he gave that talk, and if you ever met, unfortunately he's passed away. He passed away, I think, in 2010. But if you would meet him or his people, they were adding that to the equation for their business as much as they were adding anything. Because they said, if we can really increase happiness and people realize that they don't need stuff to be happy, which really is at the core of our teaching, right? So if you look at our teaching, that we already have enough to be happy. And that this happiness, makes a real contribution to the earth, because it's not only that. I guess I'm jumping ahead one slide. Let me go through this. Joanna Macy was mentioned today a couple times in a sharing circle, and she talks about elements of change, or in terms of climate change, there are kind of three different approaches. One is stopping the harm, which a lot of us are trying to do when we're protesting or writing letters or really out being activists. We're trying to stop the harm. The second one is to grow new forms, right? So you have to have something to replace. You've got to come up with solutions. So stop this, but create new solutions. But a third one is to change consciousness and to change the structure and the culture, and really to change the culture that are going to allow these first two things to happen. And I believe that happiness, besides what we get out of it for ourselves, and if you think about that, how it opens you up in a conversation. If you're in a conversation with somebody where you're trying to solve some problems and they're on the other side of it, if you're good with yourself, you're much more open to be able to work with them rather than making them other than you, right? And so it facilitates this cooperation, and I want to come back with that to the Menton Statement, which I mentioned. This is a copy of the cover of the 1971 UNESCO, United Nations Education, their Courier magazine. And it was a message from these scientists, these 2,200 scientists, to their 3.5 billion neighbors. It's called The Message. Eventually was signed by 5,000 people, including also not only scientists, but world leaders. And the very end of that, it's a multi-page document about different elements of the problems, the wicked problems we would call them today. But it's very telling with the very end. This is the last paragraph in the whole document. And basically it says that we've got to find a formula for working together. That is going to be the hardest. We can solve the other problems. That's the hardest problem. And I've come to believe that what Ty is trying to say when he talks about a spiritual transformation and a spiritual revolution is that we can have the technological solution and revolutions, but until we have the spiritual revolution where people can work together and stop our tribalism and our parties and all of that and find the common formula, then we're not going to get to where we need to be. Good Citizens, a book Ty wrote in 2013, and he says it another way here, and he's pretty bold at the very end of it. Now is the time for us to build a Sangha of all nations. So we're going to start with our own Sanghas, and we're going to start with our communities and build a Sangha of all nations. Otherwise, the destruction is going to be indescribable. And we're already seeing it in California. We're seeing it around the world, right? So this century. But he said, if you're activist, then how are you going to do this? You need to nurture yourself. You need something to nurture yourself to maintain this happiness in order to be effective. And so, we're activists, right? we want mindfulness, right? So, are we aiming for aimlessness, right? So we can't demand it, right? We just, we have to kind of create it, right? And so this is something that I was sharing with the Interfaith Power and Light, and it was interesting because we had Quakers, we had all sorts of people in the room, and they were great because what we did, and we had the time to do their, and they were fresh to a lot of these ideas. I'm not going to go through, but the question was, how do we get back to this freshness that we need if we're trying to work with other people that necessarily aren't in agreement with us, and to not make them other. And it's about this, where we're at with ourselves, right? And so I was teaching them some of these breathing, and we went through some breathing practices, and some of them were technical people, so I had to explain it this way. I don't know if you can see that. But, just clear your browser, right? Yeah, it says in your mind's browser, clear your cache. Now delete your history. Now navigate to a blank web page. Okay? So a lot of people there could get that. We talked about pebble meditation, which, in our tradition has been for children. This book is for children, A Handful of Quiet. And we actually, in Pittsburgh for the VSAC, where all the different Buddhist groups came together this year for our 10th celebration, we created these bags with pebbles for the kids. And there's the 4 meditations that you have in the pebble meditation. And how many here know what pebble meditation is? Okay, so a good number. What we do, and I take them like when I'm in an airport, it's really helpful to me. I have a bag with 4 simple pebbles in. I found them you'd find them out here. And I tried to find one that, was like a flower, so it was prettier than the other ones. That's judgmental on my part. But, and then there was one that was a mountain, kind of shaped like a mountain, and one nice flat one like the lake, and a round one for the space. And I use them, and when I have time and I just want to calm myself in an airport, particularly if something happens like the plane is delayed. And then I just take one of the pebbles and I meditate with it, and I say I'm a flower, and it's kind of a declaration, really, of how I want to be in the world at that moment. I want to be solid, I want to be fresh, I want to be open, I want to be clear. And so for me, it's one of the most powerful meditations we have. So we went through that, and I like that as a cultivating meditation. Walking meditation, mindful eating that we're doing here. Metta meditation, we don't, at least in our local Sangha, we don't use that as much as I'd like to. And in the metta meditation, it's, we sang it, I think, may I be well, may I be safe. So we're bringing, we have aspirations for ourselves, and that we're sometimes when I do it, I'll say, George, may you be safe. George, may you be well. So I'll dress myself with it. And then you go to a person you love, so maybe your husband or wife, or whatever, may you be safe in the meditation. And then someone that you've met, someone that's not close to you, and then maybe it's someone that you are struggling with, right? And then all beings in the universe. And so I keep this kind of a prayer thing on my table, and I probably should change that. I'll call him the Donald, but our president, I should step it up a notch and say the president, and who I don't agree with on most things. But to pray, to keep him in meditation. You know, my twin brother, who's not a Buddhist, who's a Catholic, is much better at praying for the president than I am, and he doesn't like him any more than I do, but he's really much better about it. So my meditation, and then gathas, little sayings that we can use. Now, I don't know if you can read this one. My daughter sent me this, but it's kind of on target. I wake up every morning torn between a desire to save the whales, attain enlightenment, visit the Dalai Lama, or go back to bed. Makes it kind of hard to plan the day. So that was a birthday card. And of course, we have this is the gatha that we really want to use, right? And that's a very powerful gatha that I forget. I do use that, and I think it's this idea of aimlessness. So there's action in there. You know, I'm going to be compassionate to everyone I meet, but I'm going to be compassionate with myself first. And one that I'm really starting to learn for, you know, shifting from coffee to tea, is Thai's gatha on tea. And there's a wonderful book called Zen in the Art of Tea, Zen in the Art of the Tea Ceremony, which is a little tiny book, very hard to find. It's about tea, but it's about the tea way, and the tea way tied to Buddhist, Zen Buddhism, and the importance of tea in that tradition when we go back. And even some of those masters that were in that lineages and are in that book. And I've become aware of not taking the time to really enjoy tea and just spend time with the tea, you know. And Ty did that all the time, and he himself said, "How have we gotten away from that?" He himself has said he'd gotten away from it. And I think this is the final connection to that. There is this story that Ty talks about, and it's written elsewhere. It's about a gentleman named Paul Reps, who was an author and a poet and Buddhist, and he was trying to travel to Korea during the war. And he was trying to get a visa through Japan, and they wouldn't give him the visa because they said there's a war going on. And he had traveled from the United States, he had traveled all the way there en route to see this master teacher, Zen teacher in Korea that he really wanted to spend time with. And so I thought, sorry, in the back of it, maybe you had a different, I thought you raised your hand, maybe you had a different version of it, but because I'm finding what I can. And what he did was he was really disappointed, but he went over and he made a pot of green tea and he sat down and he was drinking it, and he wrote, he's also a haiku poet and artist, so he wrote this image, drinking a pot of green tea, I stopped the war, and he gave it to the man behind the visa, and the guy gave him the visa. So it was all about stopping the war inside first. And, how do we stop climate change? We got to stop the climate change inside first. And it's getting to that point of aimlessness. And it's like, I'm going to do the work. I'm just not going to hold on to it so that when I don't see the result I'm mad at you. You know, I'm angry at you, Mr. Businessman, or you, Mr. President. So it's I guess for me, and I liked the term that Andrew used during, not sharing outside our group, Andrew, but you talked about my practice being on this edge. I think this edge of action and aimlessness is an edge, I don't want to say it's unique to our tradition, but I think it's very big in our tradition. And I say that because Brother Phap Man, who is Brother Fulfillment, he lives in Blue Cliff, went with a Dharma teacher, John Bell, some of you may know John, up to a meeting with the Buddhists that were going to put together this document that was going to be given to the UN to really promote getting the documents signed, the last agreement, the Paris Agreement. And John and Brother Fulfillment met with other Buddhists in New York City, and they sat down, and John and Brother Fulfillment were having a little trouble because these people were jumping into stuff right away, and they're like, are we not going to sit together and maybe have a bell? Are we not going to just, sit? And they do what? Practice together first, like be the practice. And so that's different. And I think it's powerful. That's my statement and my thinking. So this is, this message here in the green is the same message that St. Francis said, if you're familiar with St. Francis. St. Francis said, preach the good news at all times, and if necessary, use words. So this is what Thai say. Live it. And so I want to kind of end with this. Some of us that are old enough remember this series. But I really loved this series, Kung Fu on television. And this was an answer from Master Po, who was the teacher of little Grasshopper. What was he called? Grasshopper, right? And so he was talking to, Master Po was talking to Grasshopper about a wheel and the spokes in the wheel and how the spokes seem so important. But he told him, be the space at the center of the hub. Be nothing, because that will give, then you'll have everything to give to others. So this piece of wisdom to Kwai Chang Caine, I really, that started me on this question. And then I met a real master, so I kind of really watched that series, and I thought, wow, wouldn't that be wonderful if there was a being like that, a real person like that on the planet? And then I met a real person like that on the planet. And so this is Thai's final statement. I want to say that, and he says that, aimlessness is nirvana. Aimlessness really is nirvana. I've got one quote from him, and then I thought I would like us to try to, I don't know how much time we have. Where are we? Goes what, 7:30 to 8:30? 7:30 what?
9:30.
Oh. 7:30 to 9? Okay. So we have time, because believe it or not, this is my last slide. No, it isn't. I lied. It's not my last slide. It's my next to last slide. Just a little, I probably should have conditioned this up front, but I'll tell you how this workshop happened for me. When we were on the planning committee, we met with Fat Po once, and I said, they were asking what we'd like the monastics to do. I said, could the monastics talk about aimlessness? Because it's something I've been interested in. And then the workshop committee met, and I was on the workshop committee, and the workshop committee told me, you're going to give a workshop on aimlessness. So that's what they say. And John Bell said, the spouting whale gets the harpoon, so be careful what you say. So, so Thai, this is in part of the Buddhist teachings from Thai. It's the chapter on the 3 doors of liberation, and it's the last part of that section talking about aimlessness. And he says, we who have been fortunate enough to encounter the practice of mindfulness have a responsibility to bring peace and joy into our own lives, even though not everything in our body, mind, or environment is exactly as we would like it. Without happiness, we cannot be a refuge for others. Ask yourself, what am I waiting for to make me happy? Why am I not happy right now? My only desire is to help you see this. How can we bring the practice of mindfulness to the widest spectrum of society? How can we give birth to the greatest number of people who are happy and who know how to teach the art of mindful living? The number of people who create violence is very great, while the number of people who know how to breathe and create happiness is very small. Every day gives us a wonderful opportunity to be happy ourselves and to become a place of refuge for others. The practice of aimlessness is the practice of freedom. Aimlessness is stopping and realizing the happiness that is already available. One of the things that I thought maybe we could try to do, see if you're up for this, is to create a gatha for ourselves for aimlessness in action. The gathas help us hold on to things. They help me hold on to things. I have a friend that she's done a wonderful thing. She didn't have a lot of money, this person in our Sangha, but she found stones and she wrote, breathe on them. Just wrote them, and she gave them to people, and she said, stick them in your drawer. And then every so once in a while, move it to another drawer, move it around. Lose it, Lose it where you're going to find it, right? So you open the drawer and breathe, what a gift. So this could be a gift. Maybe we could create a gatha, living aimlessly, changing the world. I don't know. But I thought maybe we could brainstorm a couple, I don't know how many we could share with some people around us, and just try to come up with something. And then Marion was going to go up and, you didn't know that, did you? And then you're going to go up and create a perfect Enzo. Yeah. Yeah, she's thinking, yeah, right. Okay, I can do that. Yeah, I can see that. And then we could maybe, I don't know, we have a half hour, right? So we could create this, and we could gift the rest of the retreat with it, right? So we could, at some point, we could share if we have the time, or just stick it on the wall, and then we'll really drive people crazy. They don't know what it is. So my thinking is that maybe, I don't know how to do this, really. Anybody have a good suggestion how to do this? What I was thinking of, if we could get some people together, like 4 or 5 people, and say, all right, if we wanted to have a gatha, and everybody's pretty clear what a gatha is? A short saying, yep.
Just one sentence or four lines?
Yeah, it's like a sentence with a couple lines to it, right? We saw,
To be matched with breathing?
pardon me?
To be matched with breathing?
Could it be matched with breathing?
Breathing in, breathing out. Those are the gathas we use, right?
Not exactly, no. Those are guided meditations kind of that we use, but the gathas are more like waking up this morning, I smile, or brushing my teeth, and I don't remember that one, but it's about speaking clearly, right?
They're on all the mirrors in the bathroom.
They're in the mirrors in the bathroom, that's right. So we can create a new mirror in the bathroom. So are you guys up for that, or are you kind of, yeah, I see some people that are up for it. So I'm going to ask you to self-organize